This is a talk through of the Germany 2015 exam paper for WJEC History, and the aim of this tutorial is really just to introduce you, the candidate, to what to expect when you open that Germany paper. The first question that you're going to come across is question 1 and question 1A, which is here. What do sources A and B suggest about support for Hitler in August 1934? And it's worth 4 marks. There are 2 sources that you will see, source A and source B. In this case, source A is a written source and source B is an image. In terms of how to answer this question, the first thing to do, just concentrating first on the visual source. You'll need to look into the picture and extract relevant details. And the examiner recommends that you try to pick out at least 2 relevant points. So in this case, Hitler Youth, on this occasion of the referendum on the merging of the offices of Reich President and Reich Chancellor, the words on the side of the lorry read, "The Führer commands, we follow, everyone say yes." So looking at the picture with the van, the members of the Hitler Youth, flags, people respecting and saluting the Hitler Youth. I mean, looking in the context of the question, what do they suggest about support for Hitler in August 1934? You would have to say, looking at the image, it suggests that support was high, and you would need to pick out a couple of relevant details to back that up. Make use of the written statement, which is here, which is called the attribution. It gives you additional information about what is in that image, which can be really, really helpful to you in terms of trying to explain it better. In the case of the written source, so looking at source A, you'll need to read the extract carefully, and I would suggest that before you start answering it, it might be that you spend 10 seconds just underlining the key words or key phrases that you can see in there. Try to rephrase them in the answer. Remember, it's only worth 4 marks, so you don't want to spend too long answering this question. But try to rephrase what is written here in your own words, and again, try to make at least 2 key points about it. 2 key points that link to this question. That suggests something about support for Hitler in 1934. Again, this one suggests that the army supported Hitler. This one suggests that young people supported Hitler. So I would say it's quite important to make those points. To obtain maximum marks on this, you need to ensure that you have referred to both sources in equal measure. So you can't spend the whole answer or 80% of the answer talking about source A or 80% of the answer talking about source B. You need to evenly spread your answer and your commentary on the 2 sources. An imbalanced answer, which concentrates too much on one source, will not score top marks on this question. So you just need to make sure that you have a balance. That's question 1, and I think it's a source comprehension exercise, essentially, that one. And yes, you can aim to bring in your background knowledge here to expand upon the points that are made in the sources, but essentially it is source comprehension. That's question 1A. If we move on to question 1B, question 1B, use source C and your own knowledge to explain why the Night of the Long Knives took place. And it's that little bit there that is the command structure for this question. That bit there will stay the same for 1B on every Germany paper. So the one that you're going to get, question 1B, will start off with use source C and your own knowledge to explain. In this case, it's why the Night of the Long Knives took place. Again, I would suggest it's a written source. Spend a minute, perhaps, reading the source, making sure you understand it. Perhaps you might want to take your pen and underline some key bits of the source that you think stand out to you. When you write the answer, I always suggest starting off with source C says, and then maybe starting to talk about it in your own words, trying to rephrase and explain the points that this source makes in your own words. You need to then start thinking about you bringing in your background knowledge, bringing in your own knowledge to back up the points that you want to make about the source. And if you want to make it more simple, that's the question. Explain why the Night of the Live Knives took place. You need to think in your mind about the different reasons why that event happened. Why Hitler decided to act against the SA. The source is there to help you, but obviously you're going to know the key conflicts between Hitler and the SA revolving around the support of the German army and the fact that Hitler wanted the support of the German army. So you need to bring that into the answer, as well as other relevant points. To get maximum marks here, you need to do two things. Refer to the information from the source and add to this with information from your own knowledge. You should try to explain and develop at least 3 points in the course of the answer. So whether that's, you're probably talking a couple of points from the source and then backing it up with a point, possibly 2 from your own knowledge. Try to be as specific as possible with your own knowledge that you bring in on the answer, and it's worth 6 marks. So it's going to be a fairly lengthy, potentially a lengthy answer. But remember, 6 marks normally means about 7 minutes, and you will be pushed for time on this Germany exam. So with that one, you need to think very carefully about making sure you cover the source, making sure you say what the source says in your own words, bring in your background knowledge to answer that question. Moving on to question 1C. So we're still on question 1, but this is part C. Part C, you get 2 sources, and this is a how useful question. How useful question. How useful are the 2 sources to a historian studying the work of the KDF, which, if you remember, was the organisation set up by Hitler and the Nazis to provide leisure activities to workers. It was almost a replacement of the trade unions that were banned by Hitler when he came to power. Source D, extract from the Strength Through Joy magazine. Source E, official figures from the Nazi Party, showing the numbers taking part in KDF activities in 1938. With this one, you need to evaluate the content, origin and purpose of each source. So you need to evaluate how useful a source is in terms of what it says, in terms of who produced it, in terms of when it was produced, and in terms of the context of when it was produced. For each source, you should aim to start off by writing 2 or 3 sentences saying what the source says. So, source D says whatever it may be in your own words, whereas source E shows, because in this case it's a graph, and then talk about that in your own words. You should comment on the authors of each source and, of course, when the source was produced. You then need to consider why it was produced. So your typical ones might be a magazine. The magazine here, just looking at that as an example, it's an extract from Strength Through Joy magazine. So we know that's a Nazi publication straight away. We know it's probably been produced to promote what the KDF is doing, and that's exactly what it is doing. We know it's probably going to be one-sided or biased because it's been produced by the Nazis. Again, source E, it may be official figures, but it's taken from the Nazi Party. So again, it could be biased. They could have been fabricated to make the essay look attractive. It's showing this source the different activities that are available through the KDF and the uptake on those activities. Have those figures been embellished? Have they been exaggerated by the Nazis to make themselves look better, to make the KDF look better? These are the kind of questions that you need to ask when you're answering this question. To get the maximum amount of marks, you need to give equal measure to each source in your analysis. So you need to make sure you cover both of these sources in equal measure in terms of their content, origin and purpose, and then, of course, questioning their reliability. You must do that. You must question the reliability. And, of course, the attribution, which is this bit underneath each source, is going to help you in doing that. Yeah, the bit underneath each source is going to help you to question the reliability of it. So that's question 1. We now move on to question 2, which is slightly different from question 1 because it starts off with the only question on the paper that does not involve source analysis, which is the describe question. Say what you know, in other words. Describe the attitude of the Nazis, in this case towards the role of women. Make sure you only include information that is directly relevant. Don't go off on a tangent. Make sure you focus on Nazi attitudes towards women and nothing else. A really good way of starting this answer is using the words from the question. So, starting off with something along the lines of the Nazi attitudes towards women were, and then starting to talk about those attitudes. You need to include specific factual details to get maximum marks here. In fact, the mark scheme specifically mentioned more detailed and accurate. It uses that phrase, detail and accuracy, in the top level, which is level 3. Okay, so you need to make sure that you include as much detail and accuracy as you can. Dates, events, the names of people involved with this. So, just thinking about this question straight away, I'd be thinking about the 3 Ks. I'd be thinking about Lebensborn. I'd be thinking about the Mother's Cross. I'd be thinking about repayment loans. Clink. The woman who led the National Socialist Women's League. All sorts of things I'd be thinking in my mind about keywords associated with this, key dates associated with this. But it is essentially a describe question. You need to cover at least 2 points here. I would suggest maybe 3 or 4 points if you're looking for the A or A star. 3 or 4 points. Try to cover there. That's the describe question. Moving on. 2B. Now, this is an interesting question. It's in this case, it's an image. So source F, the family, painted in 1938 by a Nazi artist. Picture of typical Nazi family. 2B, why was source F produced in 1938? And it's worth 6 marks. Now, this one, I think, is a really, really difficult question. You need to take your time with it. You need to make sure you understand that source before you start answering the question. So, why was it produced? Use your own knowledge of the topic area to consider the content of the source and what it actually shows. Make use of this. Don't ignore the attribution. That's really useful for you to be able to answer that question. And it can provide really specific details like the publication date, name of newspaper. In this case, it tells you the name of the artist, the year it was produced. So these are really key bits of information. And that helps you to identify why this might have been produced. And you need to support your answer with some context, some background knowledge. Spell out the reasons why the source was produced. So in this instance, it's obviously Nazi propaganda. It's been produced to promote the idea of the perfect Nazi family to the German population. Aryan parents looking after lots and lots of children in a very natural surrounding, because Hitler was big on nature and the soil and the natural nature of German blood. So that's why you have all these plants around. And of course it's called the family, and the Nazis weren't even keen on calling a family that had less than 4 children a family. They didn't want to call those people a family. So I think there's plenty to go on there. We know it's a German, we know it's a Nazi artist, so he will have been paid by the Nazis. He was a Nazi party member, most probably. So we can really pick up a lot there, and we can really write a lot about where this come from and why it was produced. And of course, you might want to talk about the importance the Nazis placed on propaganda in the answer. It's worth 6 marks, and yeah, I mean, there's a fair bit of space there to produce an answer, isn't there? 7 minutes, I would say, for that one. You don't want to spend longer than that on it. Moving on to 2C, okay, 2C, which starts off with historians have made different interpretations about the effectiveness of Nazi propaganda and censorship. The following pieces of evidence can be used to interpret, which means come to an opinion, about Nazi use of propaganda and censorship. Study these and answer the questions that follow. In this one, you're going to get 3 pieces of evidence that you need to use to answer the question which is about to follow. So just going down here, this is the question. One interpretation is that the Nazis were very successful in using propaganda and censorship to win the hearts and minds of the German people by turning them into loyal Nazi followers. How far do you agree with this interpretation? And in your evidence, you're going to find some contrasting views here. You're going to find some contrasting views. And the important thing here is that you need to refer to the 3 pieces of evidence. You need to relate them to your own knowledge of the period. You need to comment on how and why the issue has been interpreted in different ways. Again, I would start by reading each source. Start with evidence 1. Read it really carefully. Underline the important messages that are coming through in that source. Underline the important bits. You can even scribble notes in the margin of the exam paper if you want to make links. Certain bits of this might kind of promote, just looking at the keywords myself now, might make you think, well, hang on, what can I bring in from my own knowledge about this? Once you've read each one, you've underlined bits from each, you've read them carefully, couple of minutes, you then need to decide which piece of evidence supports the interpretation which is in the question. So in this case, which piece of evidence shows that the Nazis were very successful in using propaganda and censorship. That's what you need to identify to begin with. And then what you need to do is the opposite. You need to identify the piece of evidence that goes against this. So the Nazis were not successful in using propaganda and censorship. Which source there supports that point of view. Moving on from that, you then need to use your background knowledge of the topic area to explain the interpretation, mention the content. You also need to refer to the writers of the 2 sources. So you've got your attributions there. Okay, so evidence 1 and evidence 2 are the 2 opposite views. So refer to your attributions. You need to consider any alternative interpretations put forward in other pieces of evidence. So evidence 3 is almost there as a little bit of help, an extra piece of evidence, evidence 3. It's a photograph which shows a crowd of Germans giving the Heil Hitler salute during a mass rally in Berlin in 1935. This supports the view that Nazi propaganda and control was successful, doesn't it? Because it's showing mass support of the German populace towards the Nazis. You need to finally provide a clear judgment on how successful or whether you agree with that, whether you agree and how far you agree with that interpretation. That's really important. Judgment needs to be given, and a clear judgment needs to be given at the end of that answer. That's a really tough question, that. So do you make sure you're totally happy with the technique needed. Watch this video back again if you need to. Maybe have a go at the question here. You could pause this video and actually have a go at it, couldn't you? Last question. Question 3. So we've had question 1 A, B, C, question 2 A, B, C. This is now question 3. And this is your 12-mark essay question, or mini essay question, as we might call it. This one says, was censorship and propaganda the main method used by the Nazis to control the German people? So if it was me here, I'd immediately be thinking about how the Nazis controlled the German population, education, terror. Yeah, I'd be thinking about opposing things or different methods used by the Nazis, not just censorship and propaganda. That's one method used. What are the others? You need to develop a two-sided answer here. Start by discussing the factor in the question, which is censorship and propaganda. Move on to then come up with a counter argument. So I suggested saying something on the lines of, on the other hand, there was terror that was used, the Gestapo, the SS, the concentration camps, lots of deterrence to stop people from turning against the Nazis. It wasn't all about propaganda and censorship. So you need to discuss the counter arguments. When you discuss them, I would avoid generalised comments. The more specific comments you make about the topics, the better. Don't waffle. Don't make it vague. Yeah, if you've done your revision, you should be able to bring in specific facts about the issues at hand. Again, dates, keywords, people, events, whatever it might be, but specific relevant factors. Now, once you have weighed up this answer and discussed it and discussed the two sides to the answer, you need to conclude your answer with a link back to the question and make a judgment. You should probably aim to write between 1 and 2 sides here. I mean, I've put 1 page here, but it's one. You could get an extra piece of paper from the examiner. There'll be 2 pages on your actual exam here. 1 to 2 pages for that one. It's a mini essay question. So again, make sure you leave yourself enough time for it. That's the key thing. And by the way, those extra 3 marks are for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So on that particular question, you have 3 marks specifically for SPAG, for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So that's something to really bear in mind. 1 to 2 pages, write in paragraphs, check your capital letters, full stop, spelling of key words. Make sure you review what you've done really, really carefully. I hope that helps in terms of making sure that you understand what's coming up on this Germany exam in 2015.